Welcome to the Phillip Wylie Show. Take a look behind the curtain of professional hacking and hear compelling discussions with guests from diverse backgrounds who share a common curiosity and passion for challenges and their job. And now, here's your host, offensive security professional, educator, mentor, and author, Phillip Wylie.
Hello and welcome to another episode. I'm very excited to have Casey Ellis joining today. Casey's the founder of Bugcrowd. I got to meet him as an ambassador at Bugcrowd, and I really love what they're doing there. And one of the cool things I like about Casey is even though he's an executive now, he's still plugged into the hacker community, still stays in touch with his roots. When you see him at DEF CON, he's hanging out with the hackers, and the hackers respect him. You know, a lot of cases people are, not to say that hackers are disrespectful, but most people don't want to, that in that realm, don't want to associate with the suits. But Casey's,
well, I mean, we are kind of anti-establishment as a service, I think, in some ways as a community. But yeah,
so yeah, do it, keeping true to the hacker vibe. So thanks for joining, Casey.
Thanks for having me.
So for our listeners that may not know of you, there's a lot of people that are new that listen to this podcast and kind of gets their inspiration and motivation to get started in cybersecurity. Why don't you share your background, kind of your hacker origin story, how you got started and where you're at today?
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that. I mean, I think, I'm just about to turn 42. So that's kind of my kind of generational origin. I think folks that are my age, we've got a certain kind of point in time that we're introduced to technology and the internet just in general. Like I started school without computers and finished school with computers everywhere. So that was definitely kind of informative in terms of, how I kind of view the world and the role of technology in it. Getting started as a hacker, really, it came down to, growing up being curious, being quite kind of stubborn with like pursuing curiosity and trying to figure things out. My father was a science teacher, so I had a lot of opportunity to play with technology, to learn new things. He was fantastic in terms of actually supporting and cultivating that kind of interest. Mum was the same. So I had a good environment. I think I had kind of DNA that was conducive to all this stuff to begin with. Mm-hmm. That was, growing up. I think the other side of it is that, I've always kind of liked this idea of thinking like a criminal, but not wanting to be one. Do you know what I mean? Like there's aspects to criminal creativity that I actually kind of admire in a lot of ways. Personally, like I don't want to cause harm. So, for me, especially growing up, there was a deliberate choice not to do things that would cause harm and actually pursue a criminal career path. But there's still that curiosity there that was kind of, the heat under the pot, so to speak. So that was an interesting kind of set of things that went into it. Finishing high school, I basically tripped over into a network engineering role. I actually applied and started basically a nuclear medicine degree. Did about 6 weeks of that and realized that I was only doing it because that was what I was told I should do after high school. And I couldn't quite, kind of put the rubber to the road in terms of actually making that happen. So I stepped out of that to rethink, what I wanted to do next, and actually got offered a network engineering apprenticeship from an entrepreneur founder, someone who started a company down in Australia. And pretty promptly after getting into that role, I started hacking stuff at our clients and realized that there was value in that. That was kind of my introduction to pen testing as a space, right? It's like, oh, okay, I can think bad, do good, create value and deliver, useful, valuable information to the people that are paying us money as customers at that point in time. And there's an actual career path that's associated with this kind of way of thinking that I just laid out. So that was really how, I got my origins from a hacker standpoint, and, kind of how my career got started as well.
So you were probably one, if not the first bug bounty platform. So if you could kind of describe how you came up with that idea.
Yeah. So we actually pioneered the space. We didn't invent bug bounty or vulnerability disclosure, like all that stuff was prior art. But the idea of putting a platform in the middle to basically tap into all of the creativity that exists out there in the white hat community and all of the demand for human creativity and the ability to basically outsmart the bad guys that exists on the customer side. We were the first ones to break ground on that, and it's well and truly out of the gate. now as an idea. I think there's something like 65 odd platforms that are Bugcrowd-esque around the world. Yeah, really, the idea behind that, there was a couple of different things. I wanted to change the operating environment for hackers. I think growing up, that kind of criminal creativity piece that I pointed out before, and just this general sense of wanting to be useful, but the rest of the world not necessarily understanding that. I definitely experienced that growing up, and I knew that there was a lot of people in my community that felt that same way. I think hacking for the better part of my life has been a thing that people just assume is bad. And in reality, it's not. It's a morally agnostic skill set. You can use it for bad things, and that's the reason we're all gainfully employed, right? But there's also a good side to it. What I wanted to do was to basically introduce, the world really to that idea, and to allow us to operate as the internet's immune system, which is, I think, our rightful role, and our very important role in terms of protecting whatever happens next from a technology standpoint. So there was that. The other side of it was I was running a pen test company. I mentioned like getting into pen testing as a practitioner after about probably 6 years of that. I actually got married, the thing that precipitated that was getting married, and my wife sitting me down at one point and saying, "Hey, you computer good, but you people good too. Not everyone can do that. Have you thought about moving across into the business side of things and trying out your skills at the front of the house instead of in the trenches?" And she was right. Like I didn't actually realize that being able to speak in terms of the human kind of consumer of what we do, as well as being able to do the technology piece, was a thing that like not many people can actually do. So she kind of identified that skill or that kind of predisposition that I had, and I went off and chased that. Got into sales, did that for about 4 years, and then I got it in my head that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I eventually quit my job, started working on different things from a founding and a startup standpoint, and eventually Bugcrowd happened. But to answer your question before, doing a pen test company, which was the precursor to Bugcrowd, looking at the problem that we're actually here to solve. Like if you've got a crowd of adversaries with lots of different skills, lots of different motivations, and an incentive to get a result, one person being paid by the hour is never going to be able to compete with that because of the math. It's not because that person's bad at their job or anything else like that. It's just fundamentally imbalanced as a way to solve that problem. So that was the thing that was kind of keeping me up at night. And all of these different things kind of came together. Knowing the hacker community and the fact that they wanted to help, knowing the amount of skill that was available, it was just kind of unplugged from where it needed to be applied in market. That was the thing that I wanted to solve. And yeah, at one point in time, the light bulb went off in terms of actually building a platform to facilitate that. And that's kind of how Bugcrowd came to be.
It's a great idea. And it's good that people are starting to adopt the idea, get used to it from a business perspective, because one of the things you run into that I saw a lot of when I became an ambassador, when people hear about bug bounties, how do you keep people from doing bad things or whatever? It's like, well, people are going to do bad things. They're going to do it regardless, but they're going through a platform that it's going to risk them getting to continue to participate in that platform. They're going to, be good and not cause any harm.
Yeah, that's honestly been a huge privilege as a kind of member in the space, actually educating hackers on how to speak business. Because kind of going back to what we're saying at the start of the call, we're not necessarily always the best at interfacing with humans. We see things that are wrong, we want to fix them. We think that's the most important thing. Culturally, that's I think really important component of being a hacker. But the way that presents to someone who's trying to do a whole bunch of other stuff is pretty confronting and provocative. So how do you smooth that out? How do you translate between these two audiences that historically have not gotten along very well at all, but really need to be able to have a productive and ongoing conversation with each other? And how do you train hackers to be better at that? Train businesses on being better at accepting the fact that failure is a part of being human. You're going to have vulnerabilities, and that's just life. That's not so much a product of being bad at security. It's a product of the fact that you've got humans writing code and deploying systems, and humans aren't perfect. So assuming that that's true, like there are going to be things that go wrong, and there's folks that come from the hacker community that take what you've built, like, and all of the assumptions behind that, tip those assumptions upside down to see what falls out, and discover weaknesses and risks that you need to go off and mitigate. Like, how do you have those two groups of people, those two different mindsets play nice together? That's been a huge challenge. I got to say, like, I think there's a lot of things that we've been able to work with. There's a lot of curiosity around this space, and I think that's been really cool. Like the ambassador program that you mentioned before, some of the stuff that we've done with swag, and just trying to get people kind of excited and kind of curious around this idea of breakers actually being useful. It's taken a lot of time, and I feel like the work there is far from done. But we're at a point where I think both the organizational side, in terms of accepting input from the outside world around things that need to be fixed in order to keep users safe, and on the hacker side, in terms of actually understanding what the priorities of the business are and how best to interface with those things, I think we're in a good spot, and it's heading in the right direction.
Yeah, one of the things I love is that the opportunity you give people that want to become pen testers, because a lot of these other companies, you're not going to go to a boutique pen test firm. Given your resume, likelihood of you getting an interview is probably going to be pretty slim, but at least there they can get experience. And that's what kind of drew me to Bug Bounty, because with my students, when I was teaching at the college, and anyone I mentored, I said, if you want to get pen testing experience, do Bug Bounty. You're getting real world experience that's transferable over to a full-time day job.
Yeah. And ideally there's no kind of gate to that. Like you see kind of security roles being advertised on LinkedIn, different things like that. And it's you've got to have 10 years of experience as CISSP, like all these different things from a historical kind of career track record standpoint. And security, to me, doesn't actually kind of work like that. You know what I mean? Like the bad guys aren't thinking in that way. They're just thinking about being successful. So like, how do you mimic that on the supply side, in terms of folks that are working in good faith and actually help with defense? Like, how do you lower that barrier to entry for people that have the skills and have the kind of commitment and the willingness and the moral compass and all those different things that come into it? People that want to build a career, how do you make that as easy for them to do that as you possibly can? It's a like work, I think traditionally doesn't operate like that. And what we've been able to do in terms of democratizing and making it kind of meritocratic in some ways, like if you can like POC or GTFO, you're good to go. And we're going to add skills to how you do that so that you can interface better with the business, write a better report, understand their priorities, all those different things. But if you've got a skill set, there shouldn't be anything stopping you from actually contributing to being a part of the solution. So like, how do we reduce the friction around that as much as we possibly can? It's been really cool to see the impact of that, because I think the hacker community at this point in time, like 10 years on, right? Started the company in 2012. We're now in 2023, and like there's a lot of water under the bridge. It's massively larger than it was when I first kicked this thing off. So to see kind of that accessibility manifesting in people actually building a career out of this stuff and going through the same journey that I did, like realizing that, these ways that I think about exploitation, like technology, all those different things, they're not bad necessarily. Like there's actually a useful and a good application for it that I can get paid for, and build a career around. Like the more people that idea gets into the hands of, in my mind, the better.
Yeah, one of the things I love too is from like a humanitarian perspective, helping others globally, is just from being involved with Bugcrowd, seeing some of these people that were in some countries that didn't have the opportunities, and they're buying brand new laptops, cars. They're able to afford homes for their families. And a lot of people think that Bug Bounty is too difficult, but I think from what I see, and I know it's not something easy, but when you try hard enough, it seems like you can make a living off of it. And there's people out there proving that they can make a living off of it.
Yeah, definitely. And then, I think in terms of what we've done to facilitate that from a technology standpoint, and this is, I think one of the things that is quite unique about how Bugcrowd's approached this problem. I actually don't see this as a bug bounty market, because the internet doesn't have a bug bounty problem. It's got a problem with outsmarting the adversary. So how do you engineer the ability to deliver human creativity into places where you need to actually get that done. So what we've built out from a platform standpoint is pretty much the equivalent to a dating website for people that break computers, right? And to me, that actually sums up the problem that we're solving quite well, because with a dating website, like, you don't know for sure that romance is going to happen. It's not a certainty. The goal is to maximize the probability of success, right? It's the same with discovering vulnerabilities. So this idea of I know that there's going to be bugs in that company or in that code or whatever else. Like, how do we maximize the probability of the right match in terms of the person that's invited to actually do that work and the traits of the thing that's being targeted to, find a thing, connect, A to B, and create information for the defender to be able to actually go off and fix those different things that might be discovered. Like, that to me is the problem that we're trying to solve. And I think that extends across to a lot of different aspects of security, like detection, response. It's all ultimately the product of human creativity and human incentive. So, logically, to me, there's a role of human creativity and human incentive in the defensive side as well.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting, when you mention the creativity part, because definitely offensive security and bug bounty definitely requires a lot of creativity. But one of the things you just kind of mentioned earlier about the limitations of pen testing, the number of hours and stuff. But one of the things that's really great that you've done with bug bounty is be able to scale, because, only having one person on a pen test team, they can only do so much. There's only so many hours in the day that they can work, and to expand that. And really, bug bounty was the first continuous pen testing model, because before that, no one was really offering a continuous pen testing option.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's an interesting one, and it's very definitely an easy conversation to start a whole bunch of fights around, in terms of what is a pen test. I think at this point in time, there's folks that view pen testing through a purely kind of compliance driven lens, in terms of the business reason for actually doing that stuff in the first place. And as a security kind of purist, and as someone who comes into this with a attacker mindset, to me, if you're not reducing risk, then what's the point, right? Methodology, it's good to be able to go through a set of steps and make sure that you've done a complete test, but at the same time, absence of proof isn't proof of absence when it comes to vulnerabilities. And I think that's how the market's kind of interpreted a lot of what it currently does as pen testing. And then there's the whole kind of idea of it not being a continuous process, that you just called out. Typically pen test gets done on a project basis, not on a continuous basis. At this point in time, most organizations are releasing code on a daily basis. That definitely wasn't true when we first started, but it is true now. And this idea of there being continuous assurance to identify risk and to have that kind of build or break a feedback loop into development to make sure that things are being fixed if there's an issue, but also that there's lessons from that can be used to avoid those same mistakes in the future. I think that's a critically important thing. That's as I said before, there's a lot of progress in terms of the acceptance and the adoption of that idea, but there's still some way to go.
I think another good point for the continuous method, the ongoing pen testing, was back in my consulting days. I did a pen test for this company, and one of the things they included was a 90-day retest.
Yep.
So we got through the pen test, and one of the things they did is they did remediate all the highs, criticals, and mediums, but there was a low risk vulnerability at the time that was not a vulnerability. Between that 90 days, someone figured out how to exploit it. Now it was a higher critical.
Yep.
If they waited a year to perform that pen test, then that would have been vulnerable that year, and someone could have taken advantage and, breached their environment.
Yeah, no, for sure. And honestly, we, without sharing things that I shouldn't, we see that all the time. The idea of there being regressions, the idea of a P4 being discovered and it's not fixed because it's a P4 and it's not prioritized in a way that creates urgency around remediation, but all of a sudden it gets escalated into a P1, with new information, and again with the right set of creativity to actually extend that attack chain and create greater impact. That's a really common thing. So, this idea of that being like necessary as a feedback loop for defenders to have in how they think about security, how they think about engineering, how they think about deploying systems. As I said, like it's getting there, which is good.
I can't recall the exact stat, but I know CISA had a document recently. They were talking about some of these breaches are not always higher critical or 0 days. People are chaining together known exploitable vulnerabilities. May not be that critical, but they chain it together to lead up to something more impactful.
Yeah. We saw a lot of that during COVID. I think like nation state adversaries like moving from like stealthy kind of unknown 0 day type stuff that was highly targeted to kind of moving to a more wholesale exploitation model, collecting shells and saving them for later. That was a shift in adversary behavior that we saw, in 2020, 2021 as well. It kind of goes to what we're talking about here. Like some of those issues might not be the end of the world when you first presented with them, but all of a sudden you see like a known threat that has a strong incentive to create like a negative impact for your organization. All of a sudden, like it becomes a higher priority at that point in time. And like the extension of those things into chained impacts and so on. There's a lot of that going on as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting that the shows another good reason for the researcher community, because there's a lot of researchers sometimes they find these 0 days, find these vulnerabilities. If it wasn't for that researcher community, and if they can't operate in a world where they can do this legally, then the stuff doesn't get disclosed, and the protection is just not out there for people to defend themselves.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like, going back to one of the kind of origin points of thesis that I had around Bugcrowd, it's, and you've heard me say this a bunch of times before, like cybersecurity is a fundamentally human problem. Like the idea of like forgetting to lock your front door and then someone else coming along and exploiting that predates the internet by thousands of years, right? What we've done is sped it up. So like, how do you, engineer the ability to identify like oversights like that, and give that feedback, into folks that need to defend themselves more effectively? Like there is a fundamentally creative process that defines what the adversary is able to achieve. Therefore, there's a fundamentally creative aspect to defense that we need to, better facilitate. And that's never not going to be true, like until the robots take over. To me, like that's always going to be kind of the nature of what we're doing for a job. And I think that's, one of the things that's exciting for the hacker community. It's exciting for Bugcrowd as a platform in terms of our ability to actually deliver that solution. I just, I see it as a constantly evolving space. Like we're talking about AI and machine learning in terms of like hacking that stuff now. Like we weren't talking about that 10 years ago. Do you know what I mean? Like, IoT was a thing that we started to focus on as an organization in 2016 or so. Prior to that, it wasn't a thing. And like, that's to me always going to be true because technology evolves. That's its role. That's what it does. So this idea of being able to, apply creativity into how risk is going to manifest in those things, like that's always going to be a thing that we need to be aware of. And the ability to scale that, to your point, and stay ahead of the adversary because they're very focused on scaling, is a necessary thing.
Yeah, from a practitioner perspective, I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what kind of tools we have to come out to scale our efforts and make things easier. Because once upon a time, you didn't have vulnerability scanners; it's more manual, and now vulnerability scanners are part of the mix sometimes because it's able to scale what you're doing. So it'd be interesting to see what some of the vulnerability scanners evolve into, and then some like your Metasploit, your exploitation frameworks, be able to create payloads to evade antivirus and endpoint detection. Is going to be interesting to see how that evolves.
No, definitely. Like I think what's interesting with the kind of the way that LLM and just generalized AI has been dropped on everyone's thinking over the past 6 months. The idea of being able to like use tools like that, but then access the entire corpus of knowledge historically on what's worked and what hasn't worked in the past to inform the next step when it comes to creating a kill chain. That to me is a really I know there's a lot of people working on ways to do that. To me, what that's probably going to do is kind of kill off the Nessus Plus, pen test space in a very short period of time, because ultimately, like, you're kind of mimicking a low end pen tester at that point in time. So that market, which is quite a large one, all of a sudden becomes automated and becomes redundant in the process. Watching how that evolves over the next little while will be intriguing. There's definitely, Bugcrowd's been using like machine learning and AI in a lot of what we do. Like, my view of that kind of technology is it's kind of like the Iron Man suit. In a lot of ways, like, the suit without the human isn't as smart as it could be or it needs to be. The human without the suit isn't as powerful as they need to be to get the job done. So if you put those two things together, all of a sudden you've got something that is effective. That's kind of how I've always thought about that. And it's this marriage of technology and human creativity to actually get the job done. That's speeding up very quickly right now, which is fun. It's definitely a lot of kind of opportunity. There's a lot of, like, seeing around corners on this stuff has actually become a lot more difficult over the past period of time, because there's just so much happening at such a rapid rate that ingesting all of it is a lot. But I think the tooling that we've got access to, like, the main thing to keep in mind is that the bad guys have access to these sets of tooling as well. So ultimately, we're going to be in a position where we actually need to respond to that as defenders, and that's, to me, the challenge.
Yeah, really from the bad guy perspective, threat actors, I think where it's really going to help them is the writing better phishing emails, because sometimes things are so obvious that it's not legit, but I think seems like that's going to help them.
Yeah, like that's a lot of what we've seen. I think the and that's kind of where I think a lot of the threat analysis around AI gravitated towards, because it's intended to be human-like in its behavior. So, like, logically, phishing is a great application for that as a bad guy. And yeah, like the whole idea of, like, deep fakes, like all those different things. The idea of customization of phishing emails to be more personalized and have a higher click-through rate on the victim side. Those are all things that, what's interesting about all of this is that we've seen the use of machine learning and the use of AI to do this stuff for years. Like, this is not a new problem. But what, I think things like ChatGPT and kind of this, Bard, like all these different kind of tools that have been dumped on the internet over the past period of time and kind of raised awareness and consciousness of this as a set of things that we've got to play with. It's kind of elevated the fact that, like, that's possible. So here we are in this oh crap moment of, like, what does that mean for the future? To me, that's a really, like, information war. Like, there's a whole bunch of different things that actually, kind of fall out of that I think are really important to think about. Like, information warfare is a huge one, and I think that's kind of tangential but related to phishing, because ultimately you're trying to, use technology to deceive people at scale. That's a big thing as well. It's part of what we got involved with election security back in 2018, and that's continuing to progress as well. I think it's a really good time to skill up on that stuff. Like, that would be a takeaway for listeners on this this podcast, is that machine learning, adversarial AI, like, thinking about the ways that these kinds of technology can be exploited, and how to defend against that. There's more people thinking about that now than there was 6 months ago, but there's still not enough. I think there's a really clear opportunity for that from a career standpoint. I think it's actually really important in terms of safety.
Yeah, that makes me think one of the best quotes I guess I've heard since people really getting more aware of AI, because the chat bots bringing availability to people worried about having their jobs. But one of the best quotes I heard was someone said that you will not be replaced by AI. You'll be replaced by someone that knows how to use AI.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, like the analogy there from a future of work standpoint. I think about, like, the time when you'd go to a supermarket in Australia or like a whatever drugstore type of thing here in the US. And there was always, like, this was actually one of my first jobs, was a checkout operator at a supermarket. So it's kind of relevant to me personally, but seeing that role get replaced by a machine that you can rock up to and scan your thing, and it takes your credit card and off you go, right? Like that thing took someone's job, right? And the thing that's interesting about that to me is that, like, that's never not been true. Like, steam engines took the job of people that could get horses to do the right thing. Like, this is not a new concept for humanity, right? But what it requires is, to your point, an elevation of skill. Like, how do we think about mastering, like, the tools that we've got? How do we use AI for the right reasons, for the right things that create value? How do we actually kind of ascend our kind of mastery of that domain in order to continue to deliver value in terms of what we're doing from a work standpoint? Like, I think that's right. I think the thing that frightens me is a little bit strong, but like the thing that I kind of lose sleep about a little bit on this one is it's all happening so quickly that the ability for the population to actually keep up with that and figure out how to get in front of it. I get concerned about that from time to time, but yeah, I think the problem that you're talking about is exactly the right one to solve. Like, how do we actually step ahead of this stuff and master it?
And before we kind of close out this episode, we can't forget to discuss Disclose.io, since bug bounty is a related topic, and I know this is something you're passionate about. So, if you wouldn't mind sharing about Disclose.io.
Yeah, for sure. So Disclose.io is like Bugcrowd, as we kind of laid out at the front. We sit in between the hacker community and people that need that input and plug it in ways that are useful, right? Like Disclose.io, the mission and the objective behind that is to create a favorable operating environment for hackers. Because, coming into this, as I said before as well, the default view of us and what we do has been that we're probably criminal. And that's not always true. So, like, a lot of the laws that have been written, CFAA, the Computer Misuse Act in the UK, like the Criminal Code in Australia, like different things around the world, kind of presume that if you're breaking a computer, you're doing the wrong thing. And the problem with that is it creates a chilling effect for folks that are doing security research in good faith. So, like, Disclose.io was designed to facilitate getting around those problems and ultimately, like, creating change in the laws themselves, which we've actually started to see over the past 2 years or so. Like the CFAA was updated by the Department of Justice to basically carve out the fact that, like, if people are doing security research in good faith, then they shouldn't be prosecuted. That was an 8-year journey to get that release, but we're starting to see some meaningful progress around that.
Very interesting. So thanks for sharing that. And we'll in the show notes, we'll share links to that as well as your social media and Bugcrowd. Is there anything you'd like to share before we end this episode?
No, I appreciate the chat. I think for folks that are listening on the hacker side, like, go sign up to Bugcrowd. We've got Bugcrowd University from an education standpoint. You and I were talking about the fact that we're going to actually jump back into more of the educational side of things as we go forward, because that's the thing that Bugcrowd has done a lot of in the past. We definitely took our foot off the gas a little bit during COVID, but it's back on the gas now. So if you're a hacker, if you're an aspiring hacker, you're wanting to learn, you're wanting to contribute to being a part of the solution to the problems that are out there, that's a way to do that. And for customers and for folks that actually need creative input, pen testing, bug bounty, VDP, whatever it might be, just reach out and let us know, and we'll try to help you out.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. One of the things too that I'm sure you still offer, people think about bug bounty and they want to make sure they're meeting PCI requirements or all that. I know you had your next generation pen test service is what you had called it when you started it. Are you still offering that?
Yes. Yeah, we are. And a lot of what we've done, this is where I think the interesting thing about bug bounty is that it's so noisy and topical that folk can quite easily typecast what we do into that particular thing, and that's the tip of the iceberg, I think what like 80% of what Bugcrowd does at this point in time is actually private work. That looks like source code review. It looks like pen testing. It looks like going through and doing attack surface enumeration on a private basis. That could be to fulfill the needs of compliance. It can be to minimize risk and identify things that haven't been found before. So yeah, like really what we've done, as I said before, is created this very flexible way of plugging all of the creativity that exists out there on the internet with all of the problems that need to be solved. And it just really depends on what problem needs to be solved. Compliance is definitely a huge driver for this stuff. So we've done a lot of work to actually feed into that.
Very cool. So thanks for joining. It was an honor and pleasure to have this discussion with you.
Likewise. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Phillip Wylie Show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. In the meantime, to learn more about Phillip, go to thehackermaker.com and connect with him on LinkedIn and Twitter @Phillip Wylie. Until next time.